first time with no notes, so bear with me. So I'd love to tell you a story about bass fishing that starts with, my father took me out when I was a little kid, and, we went to the lake, and it was all great and fine and dandy. But that's not how I was introduced to bass fishing. My introduction to bass fishing was about 3 years ago, when I was going through probably one of the most difficult periods in my life. I'd left an executive job at MTV Networks. I'm a television producer by trade, and I went on my own, and I started to freelance. So I started to work with other networks, but it turned out, and I started working about 60 to 80 hours a week, quite a lot in my business. We were also starting a family, my wife and I, and we were struggling. We were having trouble with doing that, and it was possibly medical, but for the most part, we were struggling. And at the same time, my mother had just gone through a very bitter divorce, and she was struggling financially, so she had moved into us. So to say I had a lot on my plate was, an understatement. I remember being on the set of one of my shows. I'd been working on the show for the Auction Network, and I had just gotten to set, and I started feeling lightheaded. I was feeling pains in my chest. I was starting to feel just out of sorts. And luckily, the executive producer of the show saw me, and she said, "Pete, are you okay?" And I'm like, something's off about me today. So, I was really feeling the strain of what was going on around me, but it started to manifest itself in me physically. And I decided to leave that day and go to the hospital. And at the hospital, they started running a whole slew of tests on me, EKGs, blood tests and the sort. And what I realized was something was wrong, but the doctors diagnosed me as I was having an anxiety attack, and I was having a panic attack that was affecting my ability to perform my duties as a producer. So, make a long story short, I decided later on in the week to leave that production and start trying to figure out what was going on with me. So, about a month later or so, my wife decided, you know what, Pete, let's get away. You can stop working for a little bit. Let's get away for a little while and try to, just get away from trying to start having children and all of the things that are going on with us and just have some time. So let's go up to Vermont and stay with my in-laws and figure some things out. And maybe just try to do something new for a change. And she started doing some research, and she came across bass fishing. Bass fishing, why not? And she said, "Why don't you do a half day of bass fishing?" I was like, sure, why not? So I hadn't done something like that since I was like 12 years old, and so I figured, okay, let's go for it. So she called up this guy. His name is Lake Piskevich. He owns a company called Lakes Region Fishing, who just happened to be producing his own TV show at the time too. So just a funny coincidence. And we got to his house in Sudbury, and we were going to fish his lake, his home lake of Hortonia. So that morning we got up nice bright and early. We got there, roughly around 8 a.m. and got in the lake. He had this beautiful 21-foot Triton bass boat with a 225 horsepower engine on the back. He's like, "You're wondering what do you need to go that fast to go bass fishing?" But I'll explain all that a little bit. We went on the water, and he taught us two techniques: wacky rigging and jig fishing. And at that point, I was like, okay, let's just see what this is all about. We both cast into the water, and within like 10, 15 minutes, we had started hooking up on fish. And that first fish, was roughly about 2 pounds. It was like, somehow or another, when I pulled that fish on the boat, the weight of the world was lifting off of me. So it was a funny experience, and then with each fish in the 2 to 3 pound class range, more weight was being lifted off of me. And I started to just relax into myself. I started feeling like a kid again. I started feeling like an exuberant kid again. And I started getting excited, and then by the end of the day, we had caught maybe 20, 25 fish. Now, the story could easily end right there, and I'd go back to my work, and everything goes back to the way it was. But the funny thing about it is I got really obsessed about bass fishing after that. And what I'd come to learn is this is like $1 billion industry. They got fast boats, they have sponsorships, people have uniforms and jerseys with their names on the back. They look like NASCAR guys, and they even get televised on ESPN. So this is a big industry, and I had no idea this was. Competitive bass fishing is you go out on a lake with a partner and you catch your 5 biggest bass. Basically, you have 8 hours to fish with this individual, and you catch as many fish as you want, but you can only bring back 5, and they're your biggest 5. Okay, so that's the nature of the competition. Now, on top of all this, learning all the new techniques, I wanted to learn everything, from weather to migration patterns, to like rocks, weeds, like where the bass hide is, started to become very obsessive. And funny enough, I decided to join a bass club here in Vermont. And I joined this club with about 15 guys in it. And we would all go out and have these like fun competitions with one another. The one thing I didn't expect from bass fishing is like with those 8-hour days, there are a lot of like ebbs and flows to a day of bass fishing. You get some like highlights, you catch some fish here and there, and then 3-4 hours of nothing. And throughout that time, you actually have a conversation with one another. And we're not just having a conversation about fishing, we're having a conversation about a lot of things. We start talking about work, our children, divorces, second wives, third wives, you name it. Like we just started talking about lives. I was connecting with men like I've never done before in an activity that I just came to know and really started to enjoy. So it's funny, on top of learning the techniques, being exposed to the great outdoors, being exposed to these really, really fast bass boats, which was fantastic. They do about 75 miles an hour just to get to a fishing hole. You know? But the funny thing, the best lesson I got from, and the connection I had with all the men, the best lesson I got from this was learning to take care of myself. See, what I wasn't doing with my work and making the money that I was making and doing what I needed to do as a responsible husband and father is not take care of myself. And what I realized by starting to do this is this helped me be a better husband. This centered myself to the point where I was doing something for myself so that people could see that I was there for them. It was more important to me to bass fish, not only to enjoy the sport, but to come home and feel like myself. And that was the most important lesson that I got from bass fishing. I bass fish today. I play tennis. I run. I do a number of things, but because I love my family. Because I love myself first, but because I also love my family. And that's the most important thing I got from bass fishing. Thanks very much.